Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, December 5th, 2022. We are at a workshop meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach, live in the Commissioners' Room, second floor of City Hall. I want to welcome everybody and call this meeting to order at 9 o'clock exactly. With that, will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. With that, we'll start off with roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Bunky Markert.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills here. We have a full complement, and so we are able to formally conduct business having a quorum here. Would like to also identify the staff present: City Secretary Ann Womack, Corey Schenko from Building and Licensing, Matt Janis from Building and Licensing, Interim City Manager Evan Miller, City Solicitor Glenn Mandalis, and assistant to the solicitor, Alex, what's his last name?
Alex Burns.
Alec Burns, I'm sorry, Alex. You're welcome. We're glad you're here. With that, we are going to do my typical introductions. I want to thank you for all those that are in here in person, and I'm sure somebody will show up. So pretty soon, and thank you all that are watching virtually. We appreciate you being here. I want to remind everybody that support documents, when they are ready, are embedded in the agenda. Be sure to go to the portal and seek out the agenda and the agenda packet for that. There is one change in the agenda I want to let you know today early, and that is the deletion of new business B. Discuss nomination of Parks and Shade Tree Commission member Laura Ritter to chair position. I apparently did not read far enough in the code that the officials for the Parks and Shade Tree Commission are elected among themselves. So cross that off our list to do today. And with that, we'll go to correspondence, which none has been identified, right? And next is City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the public. The Rehoboth Beach Volunteer Fire Company's annual hometown Christmas parade will bring the jolly old elf himself and dozens of festively decorated floats down Rehoboth Avenue beginning at 6 p.m. tonight. There are several road closures that will be in effect this evening. Rehoboth Avenue will be closed from the traffic circle to the bandstand from 5:30 to 10 p.m. State Street from Hickman Street to Rehoboth Avenue will be closed from 4 to 10 p.m. Sussex Street from Columbia Avenue to 4th Street will be closed from 4 to 9 p.m. And 5th Street from Rehoboth Avenue to Kent Street will be closed from 4 to 9 p.m. One more time, we'd like to say thank you to those who assisted with the city with the installation of our lovely holiday tree. Dean and Debbie Smith had donated the tree. Harry Caswell, George Plummer and Son, John L. Briggs, and Delmarva Power coordinated the removal, transportation, and installation of the tree. And our very own streets department strung lights on the tree and ensured that the public lighting on November 25th went off without a hitch. They've also done an amazing job making Rehoboth Avenue look seasonally festive. Thanks finally to our bandstand manager, Corey Grohl, and the Clear Space Theater Chorus for the heartwarming sing-along that preceded the tree lighting last Friday. An update on the Munson Street improvements stemming from the recommendations of the Streets and Transportation Committee in November. The city's contractor is scheduled to stripe the double center line on Munson Street this week, or as weather permits. The city will install the speed limit signs in January and paint driveway markings in the spring. We've also received quotes for the speed radar signs that have been requested, so more information to come on that. And we are also, in regards to the traffic issues, staff is working with the Rossi Group to develop a scope for the proposed traffic and parking study. An update on Norfolk Street: all water main work and paving on Norfolk Street has been completed. The final walkthrough inspection for this project is scheduled December 8th, which is Thursday of this week. State road improvements, the pre-bid opening for the pre-bid meeting for the State Road Crosswalk was held last week, and the bid opening is scheduled for December 15th. Finally, just an update on the public restrooms. The Delaware Avenue and Baltimore Avenue restrooms have been winterized and closed for the winter season, as have foot showers, shower poles, and water fountains. The public restrooms at Grove Park and Rehoboth Avenue are open year-round. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions of the city manager? Commissioner Sharp?
I just have a comment, Evan. I got 2 calls after the tree lighting from full-time residents who had noticed how beautiful the tree was and especially how nicely it was decorated this year, and they made special effort to let me know that. So I thought I would pass that along to you and the staff. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Legree?
Evan, you said that Norfolk was ready for its final inspection.
Correct.
What about the Scarborough and the corners, and are they?
All of that is included within the final inspection. Yep.
Good.
Yeah.
Anybody else? If not, thank you, Evan. With that, we'll go to the city solicitor's report.
Good morning, Mayor. The only thing I wanted to mention to the commissioners is that in the Linehan versus Rehoboth Beach Board of Adjustment case, this is the one that deals with the retaining wall at 80 Oak, where the Board of Adjustment denied the variance and they've brought an appeal. The court implemented a stay order, meaning that the city cannot implement fines for that illegal retaining wall until the case is actually decided. So we can't, there's a provision in the code that allows us to fine for each day that the illegal wall is there. But since there's been a case filed, until that litigation is resolved, we cannot impose any fines.
And so explain briefly, if you would, what the ramifications were of the Board of Adjustment denying their variance.
So the ramifications are that the retaining wall that they built should be removed, and they then filed a lawsuit challenging whether the Board of Adjustment acted properly in denying that variance. So the retaining wall will remain while the litigation proceeds, and the city cannot impose fines until the litigation resolved. If the court decides that the Board of Adjustment acted properly, then presumably the homeowners will have 30 days to remove the retaining wall. If they don't remove the retaining wall, the city then can start implementing enforcement actions.
All right.
So do the fines continue to accrue?
They do not. They will not start to accrue until after the litigation is resolved.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that a reflection of our code?
No, there's a provision that allows, there's a provision in state code that allows for an appellant to ask the court to implement a stay, and they requested it, and the court did implement it in this case.
Anything else? Thank you very much. With that, we're going to go to the first item of old business. A, review city code related to construction, including but not limited to Chapter 105, demolition of buildings, and also Chapter 109, moving of buildings. You might recall that this first introduction of these changes came at their October 11th meeting, followed by November 7th, November 18th. So this is the 4th time that this is in front of us. This is being led by interim city manager Evan Miller, so we'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I also want to thank Matt and Corey for being present today for the discussion. So just I'll recap some of the changes that were made from our previous meeting. Starting on lines 17 through 30, we had moved demolition first for each of those definitions, and then we had also added the abbreviations for those zoning districts. Lines 43 through 44 and 47 through 48, we actually removed "or" from these definitions. The way that it previously read was, and I can read each one, for portion of any exterior wall, any portion of an exterior wall spanning one complete story or more in height and or spanning a proportionate horizontal distance. For portion of any roof deck, any portion of a roof deck spanning the full length of the supporting members in length and or spanning a proportionate horizontal distance. We removed "or" from the "and or" sections of both definitions because we had thought that it was possibly over restrictive. So in the event that somebody wanted to remove, say, the top portion of a wall to install sunlights or windows or anything like that, that they would then be required to get a demolition permit. So we just kept in "and" so that any exterior wall spanning one complete story or more in height and spanning a proportionate horizontal distance would require a demolition permit. And for any roof deck spanning the full length of the supporting members in length and spanning a proportionate horizontal distance would require a demolition permit. Next, line 64, we added back in "of any building or structure." So that now reads, during the period commencing May 15th through September 15th of each and every year, the commercial and residential demolition of any building or structure shall be prohibited by any person. Line 70 to 71 and 113 to 114, changes included we changed the wording there because it was a little bit more clear to read this way. This would be upon receipt or upon approval of an application for a demolition permit, the city shall. Previously, it read upon receipt of an approval or an approved application. So because the city's actually approving and not receiving an approved application, we thought that that language change was appropriate. And then finally, we had just removed the proposed changes to Chapter 102, construction prohibited on holidays and Saturdays, since there was no desire to change that at the last meeting. So we can entertain any questions you might have.
So primarily wordsmithing and for clarity. Now this has had a review by building and licensing by the city manager. Have we had a legal review?
We have, Mayor.
You have, okay. So the goal here is that when we are comfortable with it, that we put this on a regular meeting agenda for consideration. This is not in the zoning code, so we don't have to go through the public hearing route. It's just come in front of us. Again, this is the fourth meeting that this has been presented, so it's not exactly being rushed. I will say I think this is incredibly important and complicated, and I think getting it right or perfect the very first time is going to be a challenge. We're going to have to, I think, monitor it after it's done and see what future situations arise that challenge what we're doing. Just any comments from here? Commissioner Legree?
Your definition of structure makes this a very, very comprehensive code change, which I think is warranted.
Mayor, after several reviews, I feel that this is in great shape, thanks to Corey and Matt for their hard work on this, and it should go forward on a regular meeting for voting and approval.
All right. Yeah. Not hearing anything contrary and no more comments, we'll go that route, Commissioner Gossett. Thank you very much. So I will ask, though, if there anybody in the members of the public that want to say anything. No, Carol? We're good. Thank you, Walter. With that, we'll go to the next item of old business, which is to discuss an ordinance to amend Chapter 215, restaurants, and inserting a new Article 5 relating to establishing regulations for outdoor dining on public space and a licensing procedure for outdoor dining on public space, to include discussion of and possible amendments to the current design manual, formerly identified as a policy, and possible additional amendments to existing Chapter 215 restaurants. Want to remind everybody that we have a design, actually a policy that was adopted, almost a year ago, I suppose, and that ruled permitting the outdoor patios on public space, meaning on public sidewalks, and that took place and seemed to be very successful. And so the commissioners have decided that we want to codify that policy, now called a design manual. We started this codification process November 7th, the second meeting November 8th, and this is the third meeting December 5th. Interim City Manager Evan Miller's been leading the charge, but before I turn it over to him, I want to remind everybody that essentially we're talking about two documents, a design manual and then amendments to Chapter 215. How we're codifying a lot of this is City Manager is bringing a lot of the content of the design manual into City Code to give it a little more weight. And essentially, things that are deleted from the design manual should be found in the amendments to Chapter 215. There are some exceptions and there are some clarifications within the design manual that we use and building and licensing uses, and the restaurants will use to help design their outdoor dining patios on public space, hopefully before they go and submit an application. So with that, I want to, let's see. And just a reminder also that today's version number 3 includes comments by the commissioners that were established during the last meeting. So Evan, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So again, I'll review, going through the entire draft ordinance, some of the changes that were made from the previous meeting. First, lines 108 through 114, we added a definition of substantially modify. And that definition reads, modification to a restaurant or dinner theater's delineation of and square footage of all areas of use, including but not limited to permanent seated dining, bar, restrooms, food storage, and food preparation. Additionally, this includes modification to the restaurant or dinner theater's seating capacity, number and sizes of bar areas, and extension of the restaurant or dinner theater into other parts of the structure not shown on the approved floor plan. Rearrangement of tables or seating does not constitute substantial modification. So that language was based off of some of the application requirements of a permit of compliance and also the intent to exclude table or seating rearrangement from the definition of substantial modification. Again, any substantial modification would have to come back before the Board of Commissioners.
And later, you're going to mention a deletion.
Correct.
That refers back to this. So keep this in mind, substantially modify lines 108 to 114. Thank you, Evan.
Yep. So then on lines 371, that begins the now removal of the city manager's ability to approve a substantial modification without a hearing before the Board of Commissioners. So what was removed was, except that a floor plan may be substantially modified without a hearing with the approval of the city manager if the city manager determines that the change plan does not violate the provisions of this chapter and does not result in an increase of the bar area. So that section or that sentence was removed. Next, we also removed section B and C from 215.11. B included a definition of modification, which I believe the intent was to clarify what does not constitute substantial modification. So now that we have inserted the definition of modification or substantial modification, and that we've referenced that rearrangement of tables and seating does not constitute substantial modification, we felt that that could be removed. And then finally, section C there deals again with the city manager's denial of a request to modify a floor plan. Since the city manager can no longer approve that modification, that has been removed.
Evan, did you want to go over line 342?
Yeah, I'll come back to
You're
that.
coming back,
Yep.
okay. Where are you at now?
Next, lines 397 through 400. There we just inserted the violation amount or fine amount of $500. Again, so this section reads, any person violating any of the provisions of this chapter upon conviction thereof shall be fined not less than 100 nor more than 500 for each offense and pay the cost of prosecution. So again, the recommendation there to go to 500 was that the charter allows for a violation of up to $500. So that would just create greater flexibility over time for the issuance of violations. So no longer would we be limited to anywhere from 100 to 200, but we'd have the flexibility to give a violation in the amount of 100 to 500. Lines 408 through 411, we were asked to go back and take a look at some of the actual costs incurred with reviewing applications for permits of compliance. What we found is that it could be bumped up a little bit, so we're recommending $1,250. Again, that incorporates actual time spent by Ann Womack, Matt Janis, Glenn, to intake permits of compliance, review them, meet to discuss them, and then prepare all the documentation for meetings as well as public notices, mailings, advertisements.
Can I interject something here? And I direct this to you and Glenn. In terms of a second go-round for permits of compliance, you know, if something happens and they've got to come back again. Same thing for Board of Adjustment cases, same thing for Planning Commission cases. Has there ever been contemplated a different fee structure for the second time you come back in front of these groups? Because it still costs money, things have to be re-advertised.
Not that I can recall. I haven't contemplated. I mean, I think that it still takes about the same amount of time, even if it's a redo, unless it's something that's, you know, almost contemporaneous, where there's just a small minor change that's made after you all have reviewed it. Typically, if it's 2 years later, we're reviewing it, noticing it, doing all the same things we do anyway. So I don't think that there's a real reason to consider a reduced fee in those instances.
So what I'm hearing is, and again, we need more conversation on this, but what I'm hearing is that if somebody has to come back for something, then likely it should be the same amount of fee. So I would like to internally talk more about that. Same thing for the Parks and Shade Tree Commission. That one in particular, I think, has the greatest propensity to come back a second time because of things such as lack of completeness and stuff like that. So,
Well, were we going to have a discussion on fees in general? I think we talked about, because, right, wasn't that
during the budget talks,
the budget
yeah.
talks, right? Okay.
Right. So we'll
Because I
complete
think
our
there's-
internal
right.
conversation here and then make sure we add that back in.
Because my concern is, when does it become not part of your job and it becomes an additional fee? Which is, I think, what the discussion needs to be on all of these fees. We seem to be fee happy sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've got, the appropriate time to address that would be during the budget talks, and we can do that because a lot of these are based on what the costs are. You know, the cost for the license fee, $325, was based on data that how we came up with that. So we'll make sure to do that. Go ahead, Evan.
The next change was on lines 483 through 489. And that change was adding in new section 215-21 titled Annual Inspection for Compliance. So this just removed the sentence about the building inspector inspecting all restaurants or dinner theaters at least annually to ensure compliance with this chapter.
You said lines 41, 43.
486 or 483 through 489.
Okay, hold
Sorry,
on a
Mayor.
second.
There it is.
Right here?
Yep.
Okay, so we're talking about,
Right, so we had pulled out the sentence requiring the building inspector to inspect all restaurants or dinner theaters at least annually for compliance. We also added in building inspector or designee.
so with that word clarification, it's essentially the same,
Right.
but per my request, it was pulled out so that it's more definitive and easier to find. Sounds good, thank you.
Next on line 557. This is for the application requirements for outdoor seating on public space. Section B now reads an approved or pending permit of compliance for indoor food service operation if serving alcohol.
Just wordsmithing, okay?
Lines 622 through 627. So we had just brought in additional requirements for closure in the off-season, given some of the comments at the previous meeting. And then finally, lines 653 through 657. We added, or sorry, that is 649 through 651. We added in a sentence at the end saying that restaurants receiving one or more suspensions may be denied future licenses for outdoor dining on public space. We thought about maybe further clarifying the steps that would be taken if a suspension is given, but we sort of felt that it might be best to keep this broad so that if there is a significant violation observed, that action can be taken as opposed to something that might be minor where a warning might be more conducive. So we intentionally sort of kept that broad for the city manager's discretion, but we think it was important to include reference that one or more suspensions could be grounds for future denial of licenses for outdoor dining. And that's all I had, Mayor.
All right, so this is all he has for the proposed amendments to Chapter 215 restaurants. Let's do the commissioners might want to wait until we review the design manual because there are some little nuances there. The public like to say anything now versus waiting until we go through the design manual? Yeah. Just state your name and your relationship to the city, please.
Should have gone over there. Carol Everhart, Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach Chamber of Commerce. I just want to make sure the timeline, did we decide on the date? I may have missed that. I apologize if I did.
The date for what?
Removal of any outside exterior tables, chairs.
The way this is written now, Carol, it has removed any deadline.
Okay.
So the license goes from January 1 to December 31st, but there is no requirement to remove. There is a requirement that if you close, there are certain procedures you have to do, including ones that address aesthetics, that keep it clean looking and et cetera.
Okay. I just
But
wanted to verify.
otherwise, we're willing to give it a shot on a
Okay.
year-round basis.
Okay, thank you for verifying.
Thank you, Carol. If it's all right with the commissioners, we'll go to back to Evan for the design manual and go through that similarly. And then we'll open it up for discussions to the commissioners. So let me. This is version 3 dated December 1 made specifically for today.
Correct. Thank you, Mayor. Really, the only change to the design manual was on line 99. We added that entry and exit will be restricted to no more than 2 locations. And that's, again, within the separation barrier requirement in the event that a restaurant has a side entrance and also a front entrance, allowance for 2 entrances.
And the previous one said 1 entrance, and I believe I talked with you, Evan, about, I thought that the liquor license said maximum of 2 entrances and exits. But anyhow, I think that 2 is appropriate. Thank you.
Yeah. And then finally, lines 188 through 193, that was just amended to be consistent with the draft ordinance for Chapter 215.
Back, what number again?
188 through 193.
All these here are repeats from last time.
The biggest change for this version was just the removal of the red line.
Okay, so 192, 93 shall be removed. Right here, tarps or other covers shall not be permitted is part of the design manual, but it wasn't codified. No particular reason, but we just thought some of the design minutia would be in the manual and not necessarily be codified. But within the Chapter 215, it essentially does codify the design manual anyhow, incorporates. So that's it. We'll go to the commissioners first for discussion of either of the proposals, and then we'll go to back to the members of the public. If you recall, my desire, our desire was to try to address this as soon as possible, and yet address it with sufficient time for all the restaurants and anybody else to learn about this and have the opportunity to comment. One of the reasons we wanted to expedite it a little bit is so that we have it codified and ready to go, especially being mindful that all the current permits for restaurants serving on dining patios on public spaces are now expired, and they will have to restart the program by submitting for design permission from the Building and Licensing, seek out permit of compliance, a supplemental permit of compliance, unless they're a new restaurant, in which they would additionally have to apply for a regular permit of compliance. And then once they achieve that permit of compliance and supplemental permit of compliance from the city, then they need to seek permissions and licensing from the state. So obviously all this takes time. And I'm very proud of the city's efforts to advance this. Also, last note, just being mindful, again, this is not within the zoning code, so we don't have to have a public hearing. Commissioner Bennett?
Yeah, I had a general question, and thanks for your work on this, everyone who contributed to it. But question came up to me, are these restaurants allowed to have dogs because it's public property, bring them for eating? A number of restaurants have been advertising you can bring your dog to eat outside, and I didn't see that in here. And I don't know what our rules are, what the ABC rules are.
I don't believe we have any rules that I know of. Maybe we need to come up with some. I would be curious what the state law says, and it may be the health department more so than the liquor board.
That was a change in the law last year from the State Board of Health to allow dogs, or I think it's limited to dogs.
With COVID, was that the?
Yeah, it was part of.
I think it was only limited to dogs, and it was outside, as I recall.
But it is under the State Public Health Board that authorized that. But I believe it's limited to dogs.
Because there's a number of restaurants that are advertising you can bring your dog and eat outside, and I just wonder if we should either include this or we just leave it be. But it's been talked about and advertised, so I just didn't want it to. I wanted to bring it up. I didn't know if it was something we needed to include in this.
So let me make sure this is clear. Patrick, you're saying you recall that the state authorizes pets to be on, or dogs to be on public space, public patio dining. I'm not sure I'm adverse to that, that just give it a try and see what happens. I would think that if the patronage complained a lot that the dogs are on their feet and getting in the way and howling and everything, that the restaurant would react similarly, and deal with it. But I'm not sure that we need to legislate it, at least not at the beginning, unless we find it becomes a public nuisance. And the public nuisance, to me, would be outside of those barriers.
I'm supportive of it. I just didn't know if we needed to bring it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just looked it up. This was House Bill 275 that allowed the owner of a beer garden or food establishment to permit leashed dogs on licensed outdoor patios of food establishments and in beer gardens. The establishment still would need to abide by any health regulations and cleanliness rules. So I can look at that just to be sure there's not anything we have to incorporate into this ordinance, but I think this state law would probably preempt anything we could do anyways. So it's probably already established in state law, and we would not need to do anything in our ordinance. But I'll look at that before the
All
regular
right, so
meeting,
you'll
for
do
sure.
some future research, bring that forward.
In our design manual, though, it talks about you have to be in compliance with state, federal laws, what have you, so that would
Cover that.
cover that also, I believe.
Very good. Anything else, Commissioner Legree?
Ours is on public-owned property, and most of the restaurants that are dealing with this, it's on private property. I wonder if there's any kind of a distinction. I don't remember the state having any distinction between public and private. I read that finding, but.
Right. Commissioner, I'll take a look at that just to be sure that there's no distinction between public and private. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
Any other comments up here? Because the silence means that we're going to go to the public, but then out of that, hopefully, we are ready to go to consideration at our next voting meeting, if apropos. Go ahead.
A couple questions. Just, I appreciate the definition of sustainable, substantial modifications. Is that address at all or cover like one-day events? I mean, that had been brought up here before about discussion of one-day events and moving of tables to advance a dance floor or something of that nature. Does this answer that, or does it have any effect on that?
Well, the way and I'll let him answer also, but the way I look at it as even a one-day thing can, you can rearrange tables or seating. And to me, that can be a one-day, two-day, multiple-day thing. It could even possibly be permanent, I guess, as long as you don't meet the other criteria, which means expanding into additional space or expanding the square footage.
Well, it specifically says seating capacity, so that I would take that if they wanted to add tables or bar stools or what have you, that would have to come back through but just to move them around, then for a day or whatever is permissible. Good.
Right. That's how I look at it. The seating capacity and these other things trigger having to go back for a permanent compliance. Do you want to add to anything?
Nope, that's exactly right, Mayor.
Another question on lines 308 there, section 215-9, revocation.
Wait, 315?
308, section 215-9, revocation or suspension of permit notice. That's existing, but Mr. Janis, I was curious, is that action effective for us in the sense of how it happens, or it talks about any permit of compliance supplemental issued pursuant to this chapter, suspension, revocation by the city manager, reasons violation, et cetera. Is that an effective process at the present time, or does that need to be investigated at a future time?
I believe it's effective, but we can certainly take a look and expand on it further if you feel necessary.
I'm just curious. I mean, you're the one that enforces it and what have you, but I'm just curious.
Sure, absolutely. We'll take a look at it.
Well, and I think it's loose. It needs to be further investigated personally.
Disagree with that, but I don't want to hold this up.
Yeah.
I think
Correct.
Right.
I've thought about that myself, Commissioner, because so in there it says, if there's the intent to suspend or revoke, that the violation can be corrected within 15 days. Well, my argument is if there is live entertainment on the patio on one day and the following day there's not live entertainment, then that's essentially correction of the violation. So I think from that standpoint, we might be able to look at it, but
And again, just another experience through the season to find out what we're dealing with. Maybe that would be better to use the experience of the season to better impact the code itself. And then a question just for clarification, and this really would go to the solicitor, I guess, is in line 397 says 215.12 violations and penalties. It says upon conviction thereof. Who is the one that convicts? Is that taken to a court, or?
It is. So normally in enforcement actions, if it gets to that level, we would have to take it, we'd actually charge the individual with a violation of this code. That'd be through the police department, or some violations we can do it through building and licensing, but we'd have to go before the alderman, or if it gets removed to a court of common pleas and actually have a conviction by a judge.
And have we experienced that in the past 10 years or so?
The last one I remember that we actually took, I don't know, Matt, do you remember, Mr. Janis, do you remember the most recent one? We had one in JP. There have been instances within the last 10 years, but it's but I don't remember the most recent.
Yeah, there was a sign episode most recently that we took to JP here.
That's right.
With our judge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments by the commissioners? If not, we'll go to the members of the public. Would you like anything further to say, Carol? Would you mind me imposing and asking you a question, Carol, representing the business community? Obviously, I'm interested in timing. If I put this on the agenda for December regular meeting, which I'd like to do, is that enough time to say that we've gotten this out to the public and to the restaurant community, considering that they had an awareness of the dining policy for all summer, and then starting November 7th, November 18th, and November 15th, 5 today, December 5 today. That's 3 extra meetings we've talked about that. Is that enough time? Because I'd really like, I'm torn between sooner than later, getting it done and resolved December 5th so we can send a note to the alcohol commissioner that we're now back on board with the opportunity to license outdoor dining patios on public space versus waiting another 2 weeks to the January workshop and having a special meeting or something. So
I think the sooner the better, and I can certainly work with the city manager, make sure that the wording is correct, get an alert out, and also some hand deliveries in downtown. We can do that.
all right, thank you for letting me put you on the spot. Thank you, Carol. If there's no more members of the public that want to speak on this, is there any further conversation up here? So we will go with that program and clean these up. They will no longer be red line versions.
Right.
Or do we need red line versions for Chapter 215?
I could keep the red line versions in and then also do a clean copy as well that wouldn't have any of the blue or red.
I think that's appropriate. We'll do that and put this on our December regular meeting agenda, which is when, December 16th, 2 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Evan, Building and Licensing, for your input on this. Now, have you had legal review? And you have
Mayor,
legal review. Very good. Very good. The next item of business is new business. Discuss amending a start date and employment agreement with the new city manager, Laurence Christian, to December 30th, 2022, 4 days earlier than original agreement. If you recall, the original employment agreement already executed with the new city manager has a start date of January 3rd, 2023. And after review by our HR department, there is a benefit to starting Mr. Christian a few days earlier in December, and Evan will explain the reasons for that. But and then to make the changes, we would carry this to a vote at the December regular meeting, so that we can formalize it. Because after all, it was the commissioners that agreed to the content of the employment agreement. Evan?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. So as with any new city employee, in order for that employee to be eligible for benefits through the city or through the state, they first need to enroll in the benefits, and those benefits will not take effect until the following month, the first day of the following month. So if our new city manager was to start January 3rd, he would not then be eligible to start receiving benefits until February. So thus the recommendation to have him begin employment December 3rd, so that effective January, he will receive his benefits.
December 30th.
Correct.
Okay. I thought I heard you say 3rd.
Sorry, I might have.
Are there any questions by the commissioners?
It seems reasonable to me.
I support the change.
Anybody from the public? All right, thank you very much. Well, with that, I am out of sequence. In my excitement to get Laurence Christian here and on board, I skipped over the next item of business, which actually is the last item of old business: discuss membership criteria for Parks and Shade Tree Commission and other committees. You've got 3 support documents in your agenda. If you recall, this was brought up because of a current shortage on one membership short on the Parks and Shade Tree Commission. I have 2 applicants from those that are property owners but aren't residents here. And so in looking at the updated proposed tree code, it had changed the membership qualifications from the existing citizens and residents of the city to residents or property owners. If you recall at our last meeting, we had hoped to vote on this. In fact, let me go back. Since this proposal was in the revised tree code, it's been in front of us for over a year, and nobody ever caught anything or said anything. And so we brought this up at the November 7th meeting, and there were no questions. And then at the November 8th meeting, all of a sudden there were questions on, well, what does property owner mean? And so here we are, third try, see where we can go with it. I did an extra support document here. As I said at the last meeting, I would do a little comparison of some of the different commissions, boards, and committees. Commissioner Bennett, you indicated last time, well, why wouldn't all the commissions, boards, and committees have the same criteria? And I asked Glenn to weigh in on that, if you would. I personally don't believe that they all have to be the same, nor should they possibly.
Yeah, I sort of look at this, Mayor, across different jurisdictions and how they deal with committees and boards and other public bodies. And it does seem to me that in certain instances, you want specific criteria for membership. I mean, for example, on the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, you probably want individuals who have some relationship or some knowledge about tree canopy and those sorts of things. So I think that there are instances where it makes sense. It can be the case that I think you could have probably have a general criteria for all boards and commissions, but I still think you'd want to drill down, at least from what I've seen in other jurisdictions. It's hard to make a one-size-fits-all for all boards and commissions from my perspective.
So you've got a document in front of you that indicates what the membership is for the Board of Adjustment and the planning, which is...
Mayor, I think for criteria, I meant a resident of the city. That's what I was talking about, not whether someone...
baseline, you'd
Right,
say.
not whether someone was knowledgeable of tree canopy or environmental issues. It was as resident of the city. Because I think that's what we were discussing, whether we would allow people that weren't residents to be on committees or commissions.
Okay. So I guess what I am proposing after having this little pause is that if we were to leave it alone within the current, I would get rid of the word citizen. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
and just go with resident. I mean, that's one option. I have a second one, but if you would respond to the insertion of the word citizen, I don't know where that came from.
I don't know either. I looked at that specifically because it did seem a little bit out of place in the context of resident versus citizen. And so citizen is a term that's typically relates to an allegiance to a government. And because you have an allegiance to that government, you're entitled to the protections of that government. So it seems a little bit awkward in the context of membership on a public body. I didn't see it anyplace else in our definitions and our requirements for public bodies. So I don't see how it creates any additional meaningful criteria beyond the use of the word resident. So I would remove the term citizen.
Okay, and that was why a proposal if we retain the current language for essentially retain the current language for qualifications for the tree. The other proposal, reflecting on the proposal already in the updated proposed amended tree code, was to go with a resident or property owner. If you recall at the last meeting, there was a lengthy discussion about clarification of property owner. And Ed, Commissioner Sernowski, you indicated twice during that meeting that you thought it was clear, specific to not including that it would include natural persons, not artificial entities. Glenn, do you have an opinion on, do we need to, if we use the word property owner, do we need to clarify that it's a natural person?
I tend to think not, Mayor. We have not We don't use the term natural person in other areas of the code where we define what the criteria are for membership on a public body, and we haven't had any challenges to it. So, you know, I kind of looked at this and looked back at some of the Latin that we learned in law school. There's a phrase, I had to write it down, in pari materia, which says that if the statute is ambiguous, the court's going to look to other statutes within the code to see how it should be interpreted. So I'm concerned that if you insert natural person into this criteria for membership on the public body, the court could say, because they used it here, but they didn't use it for the Board of Adjustment or for Planning Commission, then an artificial entity can serve as a member of those boards because he didn't say natural person there. So because we don't use it in other areas of the code, I would not use it here. It hasn't been a problem in the past, and I think people understand that a natural person has to sit in the seat on these public bodies. So I'm not concerned about the use or the non-use of natural person. I would not include it.
But I'm looking at the past notes. So we were talking about commercial property and LLCs and how you would define what a property owner was. That was the discussion.
So in my view, unless the natural person owns the property outright, they are not the property owner. So if you own property through an entity, you might be the sole member of an LLC that owns the property, but the LLC still owns the property. So the individual would not be able to serve in that instance. If you want to clarify that, we can. It gets a little bit dicey if you have 7 members of an LLC that own property. Does the individual who owns 1/7 of that property actually have, you know, ownership that's at a level that you would want them to be able to serve on a committee or not?
That was more or less my point, that I just felt like if you're serving on a committee, if you're serving on a committee, I think at the very least, you should hold the same requirements as a voter. I was just using that relationship simply because, you know, I mean, we do have criteria with regard to that, but here you have people holding a position of authority, making policy, making decisions on behalf of, you know, for the city, that I think, you know, it should be at least at that level. And if you want to make it even greater, great, but I mean, I think at the very least, it should be comparable to that.
So again, to reiterate some of our options, we can essentially leave the code as is current code, citizen and resident of city. We can also choose to amend it to delete that word citizen, which would be apropos according to the city solicitor. We can go with the proposal in the new updated proposed tree revision, which is to change it to resident or property owner, because we now clarify that property owner is a natural person without having to say so. And then part of the discussion last time, I think, included business persons or business representatives. You know, I'm happy with resident and property owner. I think that helps cover it. I think that's what primarily the membership has been ever since it was conceived. You know, if you start putting in business owners, I checked with Liz. She said very few cases have been in front of business properties. So obviously they have got value, but putting in business owners or business representatives means that you're willing to have people in that are non-residents and non-property owners. So that kind of changes the dynamic for me a little bit. So I think I'm leaning toward just the simple change that mirrors the current proposed tree amendment for eligibility of Parks and Shade Tree Commission be resident or property owner. I'd like to open it for discussion up here before we go to the members of the public. Any further discussion?
Are we clear in the fact that would this language apply only to Board of Adjustments, Planning Commission, and Parks and Shade Tree Commission, commissions and boards?
No, this only applies to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission.
Okay. So then we could have business representations on committees or task forces.
And we do.
Correct.
We do, correct. And we also, and you'll see in your the support documents. We also allow for non-voting committee members that do live outside of the city and do have business ownership, but it's qualified that they have special knowledge of their topic.
Because this commission is quasi-judicial, I think the change that you want to make is appropriate.
And we put it back on the voting agenda for December 16th. All righty. Now that we've decided that, is there any member of the public who would like to say anything? No. Good thing. Thank you. Thank you. I'm doing that a little backwards. Thank you very much, everybody. With that, we're going to go to the next item of business, which is discuss revisions to the city investment policy.
Thank you, Mayor. So following one of the previous meetings that we had about the Board of Commissioners' support to invest some of the money that is currently in CDs that the city of Rehoboth Beach has with invest that money into treasury bills. We then proceeded through that process and we started to meet with Edward Jones. Edward Jones had reviewed our investment policy and I think they had some suggested changes. So we have worked certainly with Glenn and Alex and also with Bert and the folks at Edward Jones to draft some revisions to the city's investment policy. So Bert is here to present those changes to you all today and answer any questions that you might have.
In the first 3 paragraphs, there really aren't any changes, but in paragraph 4, we wanted to broaden that a little bit. Previously, we'd had a requirement that banking institution had to be within 5 miles of the city. That was, and we also allowed us to deposit funds in brokerage firms. So in section 5, we wanted to go ahead and talk and clarify the suitable investments, and we added obligations to the U.S. Government agencies. That would be like Fannie Mae and other agencies, and then obligations to the state of Delaware. So that was fine. On the collateral side, in section 6, we had to make a change there because it's not necessary to collateralize U.S. government obligations, agency securities that are in a brokerage account. Typically, when a brokerage firm fails, well, typically, I think in all situations that I'm aware of, those accounts just get transferred to another firm. So you may remember Lehman Brothers and Drexel Burnham, and then back in the 60s, there was Francis I. DuPont. And what happens, those accounts just got transferred to another firm. Where these firms fail, it's because of their own trading activities, but they're holding your securities, so it didn't make sense to require those U.S. government obligations to be collateralized. So that was a change we made. I think that pretty well covers it. We didn't, one thing we had, it was only necessary, we felt, to get a collateral report once a month. That's what we've always received, and I think weekly really isn't necessary. But I think we've covered our risk, and I think this gives us an opportunity to earn a heck of a lot more money than what we've been earning on our present CDs with WSFS.
Thank you. Evan, do you want to add anything to it?
I have nothing to add, Mayor.
Members of the board, any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. First off, just on line 32, it says, "Who shall refrain from personal business activities that could impair his ability." Could we just change that to their ability? Keeping it gender neutral. And then just personally, I mean, I think this is a great policy, but I have a concern in the sense that it is up to or left up to the city manager to make those decisions alone. I mean, not that I question their ability, but should that responsibility be placed upon one and only one individual? If we could reflect some language to say something of nature with the recommendations of the Director of Finance or written recommendations from a financial advisor, again, just so that that individual doesn't say, I'm going to do this today, and it says right here I can do that. Just with the amount of funds that we have at the discretion of the city today, I just think it's a fiduciary responsibility not to put that onus on one individual.
Would you be comfortable if it also included the mayor? The mayor is signing it, so obviously.
Well, I think Commissioner Gossett's got a good point. From an internal control perspective, it's also a good point. But as far as who you want, whether you want the city manager and the finance director, or you want the mayor to be part of that, but basically our plan is we're probably going to be investing, 4 times a year, maybe less, depending. We can go out as far as 2 years, but I think within the policy. But I think that our past history in CDs has been 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So I think we'd probably be buying 90 or 180-day treasury bills. And but yeah, two eyes are better than, two sets of eyes are better than one. So I think at least 2 people should share in the decision.
So who do you think, Glenn?
Well, I mean, first, the finance director, he's paid to be on top of this stuff. So
Yeah.
I think I personally would want Bert's concurrence with whatever the city manager is doing. I understand the mayor is signing the investment policy, but the mayor doesn't typically sign off on these individual investments. So I would keep this at the administrative level and have it the city manager upon the recommendation or with the confirmance of the finance director.
You okay, Patrick?
Yeah, I deal. And again, we have 2 signatures on checks and just following those procedures. And then on lines 47 and through there, it says the city manager is authorized to deposit funds in any bank, firm within the state of Delaware, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a need at all to put a maximum amount of investment without approval of Board of Commissioners, or is there some, kind of?
Well, typically, we've, changing banks is a task. So I think that if we were going to use a new bank for anything, we could certainly bring this to the commissioners for approval, or city manager would.
That's fine. I'm just, it doesn't necessarily, I'm just thinking of again, if 2 people are involved in this, now that we've decided that this may be a non-starter point there. And is there any need to include, there says funds in any bank, federally insured bank? Is that button or belt and suspenders? Or?
It doesn't hurt to say that, but I think if you don't have FDIC insurance now and you're a bank, you're not going to be in business.
Yeah.
I started
Agreed.
out as a bank examiner, and we used to go to these people's houses, Milton and up all Wilmington, and the lady would have the books for the building and loan, and they were uninsured, and of course over time they disappeared because they couldn't grow. Because who's going to deposit a lot of money in a Lewis? There used to be Lewis and Rehoboth Building and Loan, and they were all over the state, but I think inserting that language makes sense.
Then on lines 54, we talk about investments may be made only in fixed income instruments with maturities of up to 2 years. And one of those investments that we list are certificates of deposits, or CDs. Now, currently, CDs are not the best in the world for investment, but that will change. But some of the better return on investments are on CDs that are beyond 2 years, 36 months, what have you. Is it in our desire to limit ourselves to 2-year investments there, or based on favorable terms, or how to look at
For
that?
the city of Rehoboth, I would recommend that unless there was some extraordinary situation. I'll tell you what's happened. The bank investment portfolios right now are in the tank. all these banks are holding their securities portfolios, and they've got tons of unrealized losses in them. And it's going to take time to work them out. Either they're going to have to sell those securities at a loss, or they're going to have to wait for them to mature. So my short answer to that is going beyond 2 years might not be a good idea, and especially if you need liquidity and all of a sudden you have something you want to spend the money on and you're going to have to take a loss because interest rates have gone up beyond what you're yielding on your securities. So,
That's fine, I'm just raising the question.
The only thing I'd mention on that as well is in paragraph 9, if for some reason something beyond 2 years made a whole lot of sense, Bert could come before you all and you're allowed to deviate from the policy with the Board of Commissioners authorization.
yeah, I would say that'd be appropriate. But my whole idea of having this reserve cash that we have is in the event of a catastrophe. It's been a long time since we've had a storm like we did in '62, where it really did tremendous damage. But that's when I'd want that money, and I'd hate to have to take a loss on my securities because I'm stuck in 5 years.
Is this purely a money investment strategy?
It's basically an alternative to, earning interest on bank deposits.
You're not going to go buy land?
I'm sorry.
You won't go buy land in town?
Or Bitcoin.
Well, yeah, or
Could have made a killing the last 5 years.
yeah, or there's probably some land that we should have bought years ago, but that's history. But I mean, as far as investment, we're not going to be buying common stocks or anything. That's the whole purpose of the policy, to restrict us.
Is there any reason to look at asset allocation guidelines with regards to cash equivalents or investments or fixed incomes, those types of things, or is that really handled by the money manager themselves?
Well, I mean, I can see we might have an opportunity. They might say, well, gee, I've got some U.S. I got some Fannie Mae's or something like that, and that's going to get you a little more money than a Treasury bill. But I think the whole thing is by keeping it short term. I mean, our policy allows us to go out 2 years, but our practice is going to be to keep it, less than 6 months.
Right.
And you can impose whatever restrictions you want, but I mean, I think that all I'm trying to do is invest very short term and get the best return on an instrument up to 6 months. And if we decided to go for a year, I'd certainly want to have a discussion with more than one person because I'm tying up the city's money for a year and they might need it.
And a couple more questions, if I can comment. On line 95, it says, city manager shall prepare an investment report not less than quarterly. I would like to be a little more specific in that, in the sense that the city manager suggests this language. City manager shall prepare an investment performance report at the July, October, January, April regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners. So it's tied to a specific reporting period. At times we get a little loose with schedules and calendars and what have you. But if we tie that in, I think it would be so that we don't forget about it. Just
I don't have any problem with that because my plan was basically show you the brokerage statement and from Edward Jones and say, here's what we've got. And,
which is fine, but I just, again, to...
yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. I don't have any problem.
And my last question, and I say that last question, but on line 100, investment income will be allocated to the various funds based on their respective principal participation of capital income. Who does that? Who is the income and will be allocated?
Well, what I've done, I was concerned with that because basically we have three major entities. We have our general fund, our water fund, and our wastewater fund. Each one of those is holding a CD that we want to invest. So what I didn't want to do is commingle that money and then sit in my office and try to allocate the money on who earns what. I thought, well, what we're going to do at Edward Jones is just open up 3 accounts. And that way you have no allocation. You know what your water fund investments returned and you know what your wastewater funds. So we'll have 3 different brokerage statements basically, or one brokerage statement with, a breakout between.
So those revenue streams would come back from the investments from out back to those specific like water or sewer or general?
Well, when the maturities mature, if we don't reinvest them, they're going to come back into the city's funds. And so basically, we're going to have a money market account or a CD in the water fund and the wastewater fund that's going to match up with what we've invested at Edward Jones. So there's not going to be any opportunity for me to make a mistake and not allocate the money properly or have the auditors criticize us. I mean, basically, I'm investing the water fund's money in a treasury bill, and then when it matures, it's going back into the water fund automatically.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Question? Commissioner Legree?
I agree with Patrick on inserting CFO as another person to make those decisions. I agree with Bert on liquidity. That's very important. And our fiduciary responsibility for the city is to remain liquid. And I agree with Bert that the funding allocation helps for transparency. It just helps a lot of things. And I would like to see the deviation include the Board of Commissioners instead of the commissioners. You need to have not just one commissioner, not two commissioners, but that would imply a majority of the commissioners agreed to the deviation. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that's the intention.
It is the intention, I'm sure, but I think it's better to have it written in here.
That's fine. That's fine. Anybody else? Go to the members of the public. Anything about the investment policies? You comment, you might have to take some of the risk with us. All right, thank you very much. With that, we're going to go to the next item of business, which is commissioner announcements and comments. Does anybody have anything? If not, we'll go to review future meeting dates. I want to refresh everybody's memory that Monday, December 12th, 1 o'clock in this room is a FOIA and ethics seminar. It has yet to be announced. The public is welcome to come, correct? And it'll be taught by City Solicitor Glenn Mandalis and City Secretary Ann Womack, 1 o'clock, Monday, December 12th. Do you have people already signing up for that, Ann? Yeah, she's shaking her head yes. And with that, the next Board of Commissioners meeting is Friday, December 16th, 2 o'clock p.m. Is there any additional citizen comment? New business, because you were late. You didn't hear the announcement. You were late. I found out that that's the purview of the Parks and Shade Tree Commission themselves to select their own chair and officials. Thank you, Chris. With that, there's nothing else. We'll adjourn this meeting at 10:13 a.m. Thank you very much.
Oh, my God.